Hi, I'm Neil.
And I'm John.
And you're listening to Tachyon TV's World of Telly, an exciting new bi-monthly podcast where John and I are going to sit down and look at every single television programme that's ever been made in no particular order.
That's right, every single programme that's ever been made. You know, we're not sure the time span of the podcast, we're ambitious, but we do know that we're going to finish with Doctor Who.
We're going to look at a TV programme, some that you may be familiar with, some that you may not be so familiar with, some are going to be science fiction, some are not going to be science fiction, and hopefully it'll be a nice surprise for you every fortnight when you tune in to hear us rabbit on about it. Now, John, I don't know if you're aware of this, but we met 20 years ago this year. It was November 2005, and it was in the Swallow Hotel in Stockton-upon-Tees. Do you remember it?
I do. I remember it well.
Now, the very first thing you said to me was, "Hello, my name's John." And then the second thing you said to me was, "What do you think of Moonbase 3?" Which I thought was, quite a gambit. You then proceeded to regale me with the story of Moonbase 3. You made it sound like the most incredible TV programme I'd never seen. So obviously I rushed straight out, bought the DVD, and fell asleep through the middle of episode 1. So we've decided to do Moonbase 3 as an excuse for me to force myself to actually watch this little gem. So, shall we play the theme music?
Yes, good idea.
Okay, John, it's 1973. Let's set the context of Moonbase 3. When did it go out?
It went out on Sunday nights in September, October 1973. It went out peak Sunday viewing time, about 7:25. And in the previous year, that had belonged to a show which some people may remember called the Oneidin Line, which was a very big, it was about sailing ships in Victorian time. It had Peter Gilmore in it and Stally Brass initially as his wife, and lots of seafaring and things like that. Really hugely popular program. And so Moonbase 3 comes along and is slotted in to the Oneidin Line slot.
What is the reason why Doctor Who fans should be familiar with this programme?
It's because it was produced and script edited by Barry Letts and Terence Dicks, who at the time were working in those same roles on Doctor Who. And basically they'd been incredibly successful, saving effectively Doctor Who from ending. Season 7, the first John Pertwee season, could easily have been the last season of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
The BBC higher ups, the execs, were very happy with Doctor Who doing what it did at that time. And the BBC seemed to want to have some kind of sci-fi show, particularly based around the moon, because obviously there'd been all the Apollo missions in the previous couple of years. And Barry Letts and Terence Dicks seemed to be the obvious ones to take it on. And that's what they did. Quite why it was scheduled on the peak time Sunday night is anyone's guess, really.
Yeah, this was going to be their escape route, wasn't it, from Doctor Who? This was their plan to escape. I think originally the plan was to actually set a drama on a naval frigate, but another program called Warship got there before them, and that's why they went much more towards what you'd probably expect them to do, which was, well, is it science fiction? That's the question. Is Moonbase 3 science fiction or is it science fact? Because one of the people that they got working on the show was James Burke. Can you explain James Burke if anybody doesn't know who he is?
James Burke was a presenter, a science journalist effectively, but he presented things like Tomorrow's World, but he was the face, I guess, of the BBC coverage of the Apollo missions. He was very sort of foregrounded during the Apollo 13 incident. There's a very famous shot of him keeping his fingers crossed while they're waiting to see if the Apollo 13 astronauts survived or not. So he seems an obvious person to go to. But the interesting thing, I suppose, about Moonbase 3 is that the Apollo missions had finished the year before. And Burke very much kind of thought, that there would be no trips to the moon until around the time that Moonbase 3 is supposed to be set, which is supposed to be set around 2003.
So James Burke was Barry Letts and Terence Dicks' scientific advisor, so to speak.
He was their doctor, yes. Terence Dicks always basically said that Barry Letts was the one who said, this is going to be a serious, realistic program about life on a moon base with scientists. The strict instruction was no aliens.
Yeah.
There wouldn't be any aliens in that. And Terrence Dicks later said he went along with it reluctantly because actually he really wanted to put some aliens in there, and Barry Letts said he didn't want it to be anything like Star Trek, and eventually Dick said to Barry Letts later that it was nothing like Star Trek. Star Trek's a hugely successful show. So there was obviously a bit of tension there, but it's I suppose we can talk about that when we talk about the series a bit more, but it's adherence to those strict kind of rules that Barry Letts set down effectively means that it made a rod for its own back, basically, in regard to that. And Terrence Dicks used a good phrase where he said, "I think we lost our sense of wonder when we made this program," and that's the thing that it maybe needs to truly become a popular success. I think there's a lot of good things about Moonbase 3, but as soon as that kind of layout was set for it, the idea of that people would huddle around the screen on a Sunday night, it always seemed a bit of a stretch to me.
Yeah, I mean, people wanted escapism, but what they really got was like this really grim, down-to-earth, sort of lacking incident, really. Instead of monsters terrorising the cast, it's more like they're terrified of like being audited. It's more like the bureaucracy of space travel rather than the excitement of Flash Gordon.
Yes.
What is the plot in a nutshell? What is Moonbase 3? Why is it Moonbase 3?
There are 5 moon bases. Moonbase 1 is USA, Moonbase 2 is Russia, Moonbase 3 is Europe, Moonbase 4 is China, and Moonbase 5 is Brazil! Which has maybe kind of raised a few eyebrows over the years.
Moonbase 3 must be closed down now. The European community can no longer afford this extravagance.
The Americans managed to afford Moonbase 1, Russians Moonbase 2, China has Moonbase 4, Brazil has Moonbase 5.
This unwanted waste of both money and lives
including the unfortunate death of Dr. Ransom and his pilot. Moonbase 3 has only seen 5 fatalities in the entire 8 years of its existence.
Isn't it supposed to be that Brazil are like a fascist dictatorship?
Yes, it's a Brazilian-led fascist alliance of South America. Now, I don't think this is ever quite mentioned in the program. You know it's Brazil, but the kind of political background is not mentioned in the program, but it was mentioned in, I think, the Radio Times article when the program launched, but also it's featured in some local news articles which were around at the time, when it seems to have more detail in there than actually made it into the program. But yeah, Brazil is definitely Moonbase 5, but you see remarkably little of the other moon bases. You tell about the plot of Moonbase 3. I mean, the kind of start of it, nobody's got any money. The Americans might have a bit more money and the Russians, but not the Europe. They're scraping a kind of base together, and it's just really kind of like scientific experiments that, for some reason, it's not always very adequately explained why they need to do these things on the moon, because if they want to make a big breakthrough on the moon, and it needs to be on the moon to do it, then how do you know that it's going to work on the Earth? And they do try and touch on that in one of the later episodes. They deal with some of that. Basically, it's like a university or a research center.
It's like an Antarctic base, isn't it?
Basically, yeah, that's right. And the way that the program starts is that there's the commander goes up on a flight back to Earth, and the pilot is suffering from a nervous breakdown. Effectively, it's actually Michael Wisher who plays the pilot, who goes on to be Davros, and so basically both are killed, and obviously this causes chaos, and you always feel that the moon base is on the verge of being closed down. That's basically the premise of it all, and everybody's super stressed and so on. So they then get somebody to come up and be the new captain, and that someone is Dr. David Calder, but his only qualification for this seems to be that he's a vice chancellor at a university and managed to talk out some students out of doing a sit-in. As far as I can see, there's no other reason for him doing it. So that's quite a stretch. I suppose if you say, well, I said it's like a research centre or a research institute with scientists. I suppose somebody from an educational establishment, you can sort of, if you squint, think that might work. But he's no kind of scientist of any kind. And that sort of ties in with what you're saying about most of it is about the bureaucracy. And again, we kind of come back to that idea is that a suitably dramatic enough premise for a series?
So it's an ensemble piece, really. I would say there's 4 main characters, and then there's sort of like a bunch of scientists. But the 4 main characters, you start off with Dr. David Calder, played by Donald Houston. Now, would that have been a big deal getting Donald Houston at that point? Was he a well-known name? I mean, he'd been in Where Eagles Dare, hadn't he?
Yes, he's in Where Eagles Dare, but he's probably most famous in Britain for being in the Blue Lagoon with Gene Simmons, was
The
it?
original, yeah.
Yeah, the original one. And he was basically a matinee idol back in the 50s when places, film companies like Rank had a conveyor belt of well-chiseled, kind of chiseled features. And so I would have thought by that point his star had faded somewhat because the roles in things like Where Eagles Dare, he was still being used in British films and he was still there. But as a leading man, maybe they could have got a bigger name for it. I don't think his name was massive, you know. I can't remember what he'd been on TV. I might be doing him a disservice.
Now then, this my office?
Yes, your office. Would you care for a drink, Director?
Oh, I'd love one. But let's have a bit of a look round first, shall we? Come and show me.
And he works very closely with the second in command, played by Ralph Bates, Dr. Michel Lebrun, who's French, apparently. Now, Ralph Bates would have been known primarily for his Hammer films, I'm guessing, and Frankenstein, the Jekyll and Hyde one that he's in as well. And in this one, he's very, very straight-laced, isn't he? He doesn't crack a smile, I don't think, in the entire 6 episodes.
He doesn't. It's one of those weird kind of things about Ralph Bates. He really only found, I think, his perfect place when he was in Dear John, the sitcom, where it's like he was very gifted comic actor, and that was in the 80s. But sadly, of course, he fell tragically ill and died very young, and that was the end of Dear John. But in this, I mean, one of the things you have to face up to in this with Moonbase 3 is there are some English actors doing some extraordinary European accents in it throughout. There's a guy, I can't remember the name of the guy who's the Spanish guy. It's got to be one of the most exaggerated Spanish accents. It's
like
amazing.
Manuel.
It's kind of worse than Manuel. And kind of comes in, you know, it's amazing he's just not walking around in a Matador's outfit or something like that. You know, it's kind of just, it's so easy.
Yeah, it does lean heavily into the stereotypes, that I've got to say.
Yeah,
especially a bit later.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, well, the tension there with Michel Lebrun is that he all the time has got a raging fury that he wasn't picked to be the commander of the base, and this manifests itself in a number of different ways.
Usually by him going Zootalo.
Yeah, he says zoot quite a bit, doesn't he? That's what Clive James picked up on that, I think, when he was writing contemporary reviews of it. But he does say zoot quite a bit. He doesn't wear onions, it's true, but that's about the only limit. You know,
doesn't have a beret, which is very disappointing.
It is. He's got an implied beret, hasn't he? Basically, yeah. I think there's somewhere in his quarters.
Oh, zoot.
So you've got a Welshman in charge, you've got a Frenchman in second in command, and then the most important role after that is the Moonbase psychiatrist, yes. Dr. Helen Smith, played by Fiona Gaunt. Now, when I first heard about there being a I think it was one of the first things you ever told me about the show was that one of the main characters was a psychiatrist, which sounded really odd. But then you realise that she is the most important character because every single other person on that Moonbase is having a mental breakdown.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right. And it's interesting. I think James Burke brought some of that in as well to say that, you know, in this kind of confined location, you would need to have somebody like that there. But the way that the Helen Smith is sort of characterized in, I mean, Fiona Gaunt was quite a big name because the previous year she'd been in War and Peace with Anthony Hopkins, the epically long 26-part War and Peace with which was done by Jack Pullman, who also did I, Claudius. So she was, you know, quite a name, but it's just, there seems to be an implicit thing, the way it's written, that she inevitably, if she pays any interest towards someone because she's worried about their state of mind, that they will fall in love. That's just, and to me, I don't see how a psychiatrist on a Moonbase where everybody's bottled up together is going to reduce tension by getting off with everyone.
Yeah.
And
every single member of the Moonbase fancies her. I think in the very first episode, one of the people in Mission Control, she walks past them and he basically just ogles her backside.
Yes, he does, and he just sort of kind of looks at his mate, doesn't he? It's like, right!
In the middle of a launch.
Yeah. It's kind of like Michael wishes about to have a nervous breakdown. It's taking off on the thing, and he's going, whoa!
Do you know what I'm going to do? What? Next time I have my shrink session, I'm going to sit up on that couch and say, Dr. Smith, I have this terrible problem. Yeah? Yeah, well, every time you come near me, Dr. Smith, I shall say, I have this terrible urge to reach out and grab you. You wouldn't dare. Sublimation, boy, that's the answer. Yeah, sure.
The final main character is a guy called Tom Hill, played
Yeah.
by Barry Lowe, an actor who doesn't even have a Wikipedia page, which is a shame because he's really, really good. He's like the practical one.
But his main thing is that he's a kind of much lauded astronaut, isn't he, basically? But yeah, he turns his hand to absolutely everything. Do they even call him Mr. Fix-It at one point? I think they probably do. It's quite a nice performance. He was in Z-Cars. He was a regular on Z-Cars, I think, at one point. So he would have been a very familiar face to people on that. But no, they're the core team, and it's all about how does Calder, the new boss, get everybody working together to try and improve the morale on this extraordinarily tense, claustrophobic Moonbase. And to be honest, it doesn't go so well for David Calder as he is during his time on the Moonbase.
It was a terrible choice in retrospect.
It goes quite badly for him.
Yeah.
But in sometimes in quite an entertaining way, because I do want to say that I do find Moonbase 3 a very entertaining show, not always for the right reasons. It's very unusual.
If you go into it with the right frame of mind, you'll love it. If you go into it expecting it to be like Doctor Who, that's when the problem starts. Because you've got Deadly Dudley Simpson doing the music.
Yeah.
So sometimes you watch a scene and you'll hear Deadly Dudley's music and it looks like a clip from Doctor Who.
Yeah.
But then everything's subverted. When you think there's a monster involved, for example, or an alien involved, it turns out to be a banal scientific explanation. So there's this conflict between being exciting TV and being grounded in this reality. And I think audiences had a problem with that. Now, the saddest thing about Moonbase 3, I think, is there's only 6 episodes. Should we talk briefly about what happens in each episode? I mean, there's going to be spoilers from this point on. If you've never seen Moonbase 3 and what we've said so far makes you want to watch it, then go away and watch it and then come back and pick up from here. But we're going to just break down all the mental crises that happen in the series. So we've talked about the first episode, which is basically the commander gets killed because somebody has a nervous breakdown and then Calder comes in and replaces him. That's basically the first one. And then the second episode, I think that's the one that's most sort of begins like an episode of Doctor Who. What happens in that one?
That's the one where basically Calder's reign starts with 2 of the people, the scientists, being killed in mysterious circumstances.
Day 1.
So day 1, that's right. He comes in, let's improve morale. Oh, what we should probably say is that one of his techniques, it's like the opposite of team building he does in the first episode, was that he basically thinks the team are a bit too individualistic. So basically, in order to try and team build, he takes them all out and fakes a crisis that means they're all going to die. And he seems like slightly confused that why they might be really, really angry about this. Because they look like they're going to run out of air. So that's the first thing he does. And then in the second episode, immediately 2 people die. And they die in mysterious circumstances. And with kind of like a strange noise happens when they get killed. And because everybody's very tense on this Moonbase, lots of rumours fly around that it's a monster, basically. It's called Behemoth, the episode. Behemoth is written by John Brayson. It's got a character in it called Peter Conway. He's one of the scientists. And you just get this nice, interesting thing where Peter Conway is absolutely bored, doesn't even begin to enter into it. He's full of existential dread, basically. He can't see the point to anything, and you get that much more in a later episode. But in this one, he seizes upon the idea of there being a monster just because of the fact that it will, mean that there's more to life than his scientific endeavor. And even though he goes on to actually be the one to discover that it's not a monster and there's a more banal reason for it, it's a really interesting bit. Now, John Brayson obviously wanted to do something with this character because the character is looked at much more closely in episode 4, Outsiders.
Yeah, should we talk about the other scientists as well? Because you'll recognise quite a lot of these scientists if you're a Doctor Who watch. Peter Miles is one of them. The guy you just mentioned, he's played by John Hallam, that you'll probably know best playing Light in Ghostlight. He's brilliant, by the way. I think he's probably my favourite.
When I was a kid, the famous thing that he was in was the Malin streak. He went around littering the countryside with illegitimate offspring, all of whom had a streak of grey hair that marked them out as his brood. He was very over the top in that. And then he ended up, later in his career, he ended up in Dirty Dens.
Cellmate.
in EastEnders during that weird thing where the EastEnders banked loads of episodes, loads of scenes with Dirty Den to make it so he didn't leave, so they spread it out. He's really, really, really good actor.
And you've got Garrick Hagon, famous Canadian actor, most known for playing Biggs in Star Wars, and in this one he plays Bruno.
Let's get on to Bruno.
Stereotypical Italian guy. I assume he's Italian. Who can tell with these accents?
Yeah.
So Behemoth is about a monster that's not a monster. And then the third episode is when things get really psychological. What's the name of the actor that plays the main character in this? He's most known for playing Mr. Meeker on Rent-A-Ghost.
Mr. Meeker. I can't. You know what? It's a terrible thing about getting old, isn't it? How you suddenly forget things you used to know straight off the top of your head. Hang on a minute. I will tell you. Edward Brayshaw, of course.
Who was the first master, as everybody knows.
Steady. I told you, leave Doctor Who until the last episode we do of this. Come on.
So the third episode revolves around this guy. And how do we describe this guy? He's rapey.
Yeah, he's not the only Moonbase 3 person to be rapey. But yeah, he's rapey and just deeply sinister. And basically what you, the viewer, realise is that this man who seems to be friendly with everyone, he's actually just going around stirring them up. He's kind of whispering in people's ears, very Iago-like character, and basically getting everybody angry. So he gets, for instance, he basically says to Tom Hill that this woman he works with is going to be a nag to him and is going to keep trying to hurry him on. So Tom's then sensitized to that as soon as she asks him anything. But then there's also this kind of weird relationship with Helen, the psychiatrist, where she seems quite keen on him, but then basically he literally attacks her, and it's quite a horrible scene. But then it's a really disturbing piece of acting when he does that strange thing where he's just staring into space and starts kind of whispering.
You knew all the time what was here. You can't deny it, don't try. I never made any secret of it. You knew all the time, you knew, and you encouraged me. So I had every reason to believe you, gave me every reason. And yet now you do this. Close. You do this to me. You do this.
Probably the most profound episode is Outsiders, which is 45 minutes about Ibsen and suicide.
Yeah, there's a very funny bit where she said to him, there's a deathless dialogue where she says, "Why did you become a metallurgist?" And he says,
Ibsen.
Ibsen.
But I do love this episode because it's very bleak. But John Hallam is so good as Conway. And it's just nicely done in terms of the way that they have another scientist who's called Stephen Partners, who basically no one gets on with him. In fact, everybody hates him and he treats everybody like dirt. He's played by an actor called Tom Kempinski, who's an interesting character, actually. Became a playwright, wrote something called Duet for One, which was a very sort of about a violinist with multiple sclerosis, very similar to Jacqueline du Pré, which went on Broadway. But nobody likes this scientist, and he's desperate to win a Nobel Prize. He's desperate to succeed. And indeed, he fraudulently faked some of his research, whereas Peter Conway actually achieves what he set out to do, makes the scientific breakthrough that the Moonbase definitely need, because they're being visited by a European dignitary, another technocrat, bureaucrat, whatever, who's come over, and they need results, and it's all very tense about that. But Peter Conway does it, and it means nothing to him because he's gone. He's like, life is meaningless for him.
He doesn't want to live in this world of progress, does he?
No.
And it's horrific what happens.
It is horrific, and I just wish that some of the other actors were a little bit better, putting it bluntly, yeah. or in the same ballpark as kind of as John Hallam, because I think I've seen Fiona Gaunt be very good in some things, but some of her reactions at the end of that particular episode, it's really well written, really good lines, but I just think doesn't quite get it, and I think it's easily the best episode.
Yeah, it's unforgettable, that episode, definitely.
It's really good, and indeed did get some reasonable reviews at the time. There was at least one local newspaper said something along the lines of, well, if we had doubts about this program, we should dismiss them now.
What's he doing?
Just looking, Michel.
Switch it off!
Episode 5, Castor and Pollux. That's the one that's most like Apollo 13, where Tom gets into trouble in his spaceship, and they have to ask the Russians to come and help him. And there's all this sort of politicking about whether the Russians can lend a hand, and are the Russians our friend in 2003? It's quite vague.
I think they are, and in the article that with what there was in the local newspaper about this, it seems that basically the Russians, and that's not the big problem anymore. That scene and
it's the Brazilians.
Yes, it's the Brazilians that are the trouble. It's the South Americans, bunch of fascists. The Russians are sort of friendly, but what's really odd about this episode is that there's a Russian astronaut who's going to go on a major mission, and so they're trying to wrap this astronaut in cotton wool. But he comes to a party at Moonbase 3, and Moonbase 3 always has the best parties. Not like
the Brazilians,
not like Moonbase 5. But he comes over, this Russian, and basically he's a bit younger than Tom, and he goes up to Tom and basically tells everyone that he used to have posters of Tom on his bedroom wall, which is really strange, and everybody reacts as if this is perfectly normal in every way. But basically, the upshot is that when Tom gets in trouble, despite orders to the contrary, this guy goes out to save Tom, and he's willing to do anything for Tom. So I think there's quite a strong love going on there. I don't know whether it was deliberately written in that way, but it certainly came across like that.
Professor Calder, may I introduce Colonel Dmitry Pavlovich Gararov.
My honor to meet you, sir.
Believe me, Colonel, the pleasure is mine. May I introduce Tom Hill?
At last I meet you, Tom.
Oh.
The greatest cosmonaut in the world, this man.
No, Dmitry, that honor's yours.
When I was training as a cosmonaut, the walls of my room were covered in photographs of Tom Hill. And in class, when we were given problems to solve, I would always ask myself, in this situation, what would Tom Hill do?
Have a drink.
And then the final episode is very bizarre. It's the one that feels closest to proper science fiction, I guess. Basically what happens is Earth blows itself up. Well, they melt the ice caps, don't they, for some bizarre reason.
And it sets the atmosphere on fire, basically, doesn't it?
So everyone on Moonbase can't communicate with the Earth, and as far as they're concerned, the Earth's dead, and they can't survive like Moonbase Alpha in Space 1999 because they're not growing their own food or anything like that. So they're basically staring death in the face, and into the middle of that, you've got Michael Goff as a scientist who predicted all of this would happen. And he spends the entire episode strolling around the moon base, basically saying, well, I told you so. And they come up with this incredible plan, and David Calder and Tom Hill, they come up with this incredible plan to basically kill everybody in their sleep so they don't have to stress about it.
Yeah, they make a decision not to ration. They just say, well, let's just keep normal rations and then we'll kill everyone before the food runs out.
They send Michel Lebrun back to Earth to see if he can figure out what's going on, and they lose communication with him. And then Tom goes off to the back room to turn on the gas.
The carbon monoxide, which he's going to use to kill everyone.
In the middle of a party.
Only the commander and Tom know that this carbon monoxide is going to be released, and Tom goes off, as Neil says, to actually do that. And then as they're just kind of sitting around or having this party and are all about to die, the big TV screen comes on, and it's a game show from Earth. And out of nowhere, it just suddenly comes, and it looks like a pretty terrible game show, actually. It's kind of one of those later iterations of Family Fortunes or something like that. But it was, and so panic is averted. And it's quite oddly done because Michelle gets back in touch with them and says, basically, it's just been a communication blackout. It didn't actually burn up the atmosphere, but there has been a massive problem with plummeting temperatures around the Earth, and that's sort of glossed over quite a bit. But Michael Goff then just says, oh, hang on, I think I've got the answer. This is why it was okay. So it was okay.
They all decide that they're going to spend their last moments on Earth writing Wikipedia.
Yes.
So they all go off into their little rooms and write Earth's history from their perspective, as if nothing from Earth's going to survive. There's no computer records of anything. So
yeah, that's again. Michael Goff says no, you can't. He's kind of don't give anyone hope by sending Michelle back.
That's the last thing they need.
The last thing they need. So what they need to do is write down all of Earth's history. so someone can find it in the future. So they're all desperately scribbling away trying to write about...
Trying to explain Beethoven.
So you do actually have a scene of one woman on the bass talking through, kind of dictating an essay about Beethoven's late quartets. So that is genuinely odd again.
It's incredible. It's a shame that if they knew the program was going to be cancelled, a great ending would have been that Tom goes off and turns the gas on, and then they're watching this quiz show on the TV and they all fall asleep and die. That would have been a perfect ending to this, like The Mist.
Yeah, the Mist edit of View of a Dead Planet, the final episode.
There was plans for a second series, I believe.
There were definitely. Barry Letts said, but how well formed they were, I don't know. In an interview for in the press at the time, Barry Letts said if we get a second series, it will be 13 episodes, and we've got more than enough material. The mind slightly boggles about exactly how they would have that. But of course, the other thing about the final episode is the only people who don't lose their heads are English. All of the Europeans go various states into kind of demented states. Bruno is, I mean, God knows what the actor thought when he was given this script, because basically not only does he try and rape Helen Smith, it's a really unpleasant scene as well. 7:45 on a Sunday night. And the worst thing about that, of course, is that it's not just with Helen, it's with someone else, another one of the women as well, the one who's into Beethoven. The next day, we're all sitting around the table in the cafe. I've apologised and it's all forgotten about. And then Bruno, to try and make up for it, volunteers to be the person who's going to fly back to Earth to see what's going on. And then he completely bottles it, turns off his intercom, and then just goes and hides on the moon, crying. I mean, I'm sure you thought, so what? I'm going to be a rapist and I'm going to be a coward. It's very, again, but it's so kind of problematic, particularly because in fact it is all the Mediterranean people who lose their minds and get drunk.
Though I suppose the odds are that whatever finds our vestiges will be incomparably more developed than we are. Our little jottings will seem as inexplicable to them as the motives of lichen are to us.
No. I visualize my tape being found by a beautiful lady from Arcturus or Cassiopeia. Yeah? Like a Miss World, only pretty. Everything we like in women, she will have 2 of.
And the things?
And the things we like best, she will have 4.
So, what was the audience like for this program? I believe it started quite well and then tanked.
It started okay. I mean, basically, the way that the BBC were particularly bothered about things in those days was the audience share. And on there, which is what they used to have on there, these things called daily viewing barometers, which they used to produce. And basically, the first episode got 11.3% of the share. Bearing in mind, this is 3 channels. Second episode, 5.1%.
Oh dear.
So it halved.
Wow.
So that's very low. Then you got 7.6. Fourth episode got 9. Fifth went down to 6.3. Sixth was 6.6. The previous week before it started was the last episode of Anne of Green Gables, which was like a Sunday late afternoon, evening drama. And that got 12.2%. So the final episode of that got more than the first episode. Wow. And then when the Oneidin line started the following week after Moonbase 3 had finished, it started on 16.8 and went up to 17.2. So it's just basically started off with an okay-ish, what you might say the norm would be in that, and then just fell off a cliff.
It was doomed from the start, really, wasn't it?
It was.
And for a long time, Moonbase 3 was thought lost. The BBC wiped all the episodes. Because one thing we haven't mentioned is that it wasn't just the BBC who made this programme.
No, it was made by
20th Century Fox.
Yeah, 20th Century Fox. There are a few programmes like this. It's quite an interesting area that basically it was a co-production. I think it was quite expensive, Moonbase 3, and they could probably only have done it if they had some extra money. So it's probably worth a punt in that respect. Similarly, Churchill's People was made as a co-production. Colditz as well, which was a bit before this. Now we know that Colditz was shown, but it's not entirely clear when or where Moonbase 3 was shown, and it's certainly when I've looked into it in the past, I don't think Churchill's People was ever shown anywhere in America, even though it had America. So just because it was a co-production doesn't always mean it will have ended up being shown.
It did end up in their archives, thankfully.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have it. And there's a funny story about Terence Dix's reaction to this, isn't
Yes,
there?
I'm sure it's an apocryphal story, but I think it was 93 when it was discovered. Someone rang Terence up and said, it's great. They've found Moonbase 3. And there was a pause, and Terence just said, oh, fuck.
Any man can make a mistake. But mankind cannot be allowed one single mistake.
For a long period of time, no one could actually watch it, and then it came back in the 90s. And did it get any repeats on cable or anything like that, or did it just end up on DVD?
It was shown on UK Gold. Pretty sure it was released on VHS. Certainly released on DVD, but unfortunately, it's an NTSC tape, so it doesn't look great. But also, there's something wrong with the aspect ratio. It's squashed a bit. It's not quite right. Squashed kind of like down. I mean, I think I even tried, God help me, to try and adjust it myself. I remember at the time asking Steve Roberts' advice on it, or Pete Crocker, I can't remember which, experts in video restoration. And basically, I was just hoping that they'd say, well, just send it over and I'll do it. Because they could do it in 10 minutes, but they never did.
If you're listening, Steve.
Yeah, exactly. If you're listening, please sort it out.
All the monitoring circuits are dead.
Give ourselves another 24 hours. 2,100 hours tomorrow.
Yeah.
It'll be easier. Staff are expecting another week or so.
I've got everything ready. We'll just feel sleepy, go to bed, and we won't wake up.
The program it reminds me of the most in terms of its sort of pacing and its sort of like grim reality is the Sandbaggers, in the sense that you never really see anything outside the office. It's all internalised and not very visually exciting, but very exciting from a character point of view. And I really like these characters. I would love to have spent more time with them. I think David Calder, played by Donald Houston, he's got a lot of riz, as the kids say. It's a shame. I really got to really like the four main leads and the other scientists as well. And it's a shame it didn't go to a second series. I would have liked to have seen what they did with it.
Yeah, it would be fascinating to see where it would have gone. As I say, I don't think there's anything in the Written Archive Centre or any further about that. And sadly, of course, we can't ask.
Can't ask now.
Barry and Terence anymore.
Now, one of the things we want to do on this podcast is to get the opinions of our listeners. And even though we haven't got any listeners because this is the first episode, we did put out the call for some opinions that people might have about Moonbase 3. And it was very much split down the middle. Half of the people hated it and the other half thought it was okay. So, for example, we got Chris Orton, who said it was televisual mogodon. I think that's a bit harsh. David Brunt said, I watched Moonbase 3 and it cured my insomnia, though it also put me into a coma for 6 months. My favourite is from Martin Robertson, which he says, it makes Solaris look like Guardians of the Galaxy. I think they did the same thing I did when I first watched it. It's just went in expecting it to be like Doctor Who, be bored by it because there's no monsters, and then switching off. I think if you put the effort in, you'll enjoy it.
From Chinny Vision, we've got make Star Cops look action-packed. In fact, it makes the shipping forecast look action-packed. And Konstantinos Implipkian, the most numbingly cozy space procedural I have ever watched. I don't know whether that's good or bad. I would say that's...
How many have you seen?
I mean, exactly. The most numbingly cozy. I mean, is numb and coziness bad?
I wouldn't call mental breakdowns and 4 attempts of rape and suicide cozy.
There's reference to suicide in every episode, Konstantinos. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what you're talking about, cozy. That's just frankly mad.
Simon says, nice cast. Sadly, the show's ethos and writing seems to be, let's have the least excitement, action or entertainment possible.
That's the let's directive. No excitement, no action or entertainment.
But then we do have some more positive feedback. We've got John Deere, extremely underrated, a genuine attempt at intelligent adult science fiction. I'd go along with that.
Yeah, and Ian Greaves says, it's perfectly good. And I've never understood it being the butt of jokes. It's shat on songs of praise.
Stephen Pasqua, he should be on the Moonbase with a name like that. A little stiff and po-faced and quite dull, but with some good performances from the cast. People expect it to be inflated science fiction, when in fact it's pretty plausible science faction.
And the lovely Cy Hart says, I don't think it's as bad as its reputation suggests. It's slow and talky, but I enjoyed it when I finally had the chance to see it. The model work is great for the time.
And we'll leave the last word to the lovely Una McCormack, who says, I like it, bit sexist. I think we can agree. I think we
absolutely can agree with that. There's no doubt about that.
I think that's it for Moonbase 3. Have you got anything else you'd like to say about Moonbase 3, John? Or do you think we've covered all the bases?
The only thing I'll say is that, just because I found this out myself, it's a gift that keeps on giving, is that basically when John Hallam's character Peter Conway leaves his suicide note, it's got a strange quote about it's a thing like Athens, the mother of a mode of life. And I thought that sounds very specific. And it's a quote from a G.K. Chesterton novel called The Napoleon of Notting Hill, which is like a dystopian world of the future where there's a war between Notting Hill and one of the other boroughs of London. It struck me as a really weird thing to use as a quote for someone's suicide note. But anyway, it's a gift that keeps on giving.
It is the coming of a new age in which I have no place. The new truths are not my truths. I think I am the perennial dodo.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and join us in 2 weeks' time when John and I will take another trip through the archives for your listening pleasure. Until then, I've been Neil.
And I've been John.
And you've been listening to The World of Telly.
Goodbye from the world of Telly.
Oh, zoot.